Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb stuff businesses do. We ask the big, juicy questions like why, what were they thinking, and then we chase down the answers. I'm Matt, your corporate plumber.
And I'm Rob, your leadership locksmith.
So today we're going to dig into that corporate creativity lie, the gap between what leaders say they want and what they actually do when somebody dares to color outside the lines. Now, creativity. We spoke on this recently, Rob, and I'm really keen to get your take on what you think creativity means. What comes to your mind when I say creativity at work?
The first thing that comes to my mind when you mention creativity is that little inner voice that goes, "But you're not a creative person, Rob." I think we have this. We still have this hangover that creativity is what artists do. It's what musicians do. It's what sculptors do. It's some sort of a fine art. Yeah, where in reality, creativity is just having a sort of an unorthodox approach to something. I was listening to Alex O'Connor's podcast the other day. He was interviewing Rory Sutherland, and he said every problem that exists currently is a problem that has to be solved with creativity. Because if it could be solved by logic, somebody would have solved it with logic by now. He says, so you've got to go for the really unintuitive solutions to these kinds of big problems. I thought that was a really interesting take on it. But to answer your question, my visceral response is, I'm not a creative person.
Where does that come from, Rob? Why that gut reaction, that allergic reaction?
Well, I think a lot of people experience that, that sort of vibe of I'm not a creative person. In my own case, it was probably because I have a sister who has a degree in fine art. And I am not so good when it comes to fine art, or at least that's what the voices in my head keep telling me. There was an incident where my niece, who was about 6 years old at the time, I said, what would you like to do? I was home in Dublin spending a bit of time with her. And she said, let's draw. And I said, great, you get the paper and the crayons and we'll draw. Yeah. And I said, I'll draw a cat for you, because I figured I could probably do a line drawing of a cat, And she went, no, draw a lion. And I went, okay. So she hands me a brown and a black and a yellow crayon, and I start drawing a line. And I draw this line. She's delighted with it. But then my fine arts degree sister comes in the door and takes one look at my line and basically doubles up laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? And she says, your line looks a bit like Paul McCartney. It was a terrible drawing. It was good enough for my 6-year-old niece, who thought it was the best line she'd ever seen in her life. Yeah. But for my sister with fine art, who was just having a bit of fun with me, who was just, taking the piss a little bit, just laughing for shits and giggles, really. But what she was doing was she was judging my line. Yeah. To make matters worse, the following Christmas, my line had been rediscovered. Somebody had found the piece of paper. And what they decided to do was print the line on a cushion, on a blanket, on a mug, and send all of this to me as my Christmas present. Now, here's one I prepared earlier. I don't know how well this is going to show up on the camera, but that's my line on the pillow. And you can see it's a pretty terrible drawing of a line, right? But the point is simply this, right? All of that was done in good fun. I have a great relationship with my sisters, with my mum, with my whole family. It was all done in jest. Yeah. But those little voices in my head kept going, you suck at drawing. Mm. Even though it was all done in jest, there's a fair chance that I'll never draw again based off that experience, right? Because I know I get judged for it, and those little voices kick in, and it goes to hell. So that's why when you say, what's your reaction to creativity? I go, I'm not a creative person. I instantly think about the lion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now there's a difference when somebody encourages you. I went on a team building exercise once where we were learning how to draw portraits. And the teacher that we had, I'm walking into this going, I'm not a creative person. But the teacher that we had was enthusiastic, was non-judgmental, was encouraging you to go a little bit wild. Yeah. And I drew what I consider the best picture painting I've ever drawn in my life. Now, you've seen the lion, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, and that's my usual standard. Yeah. I
Oh,
drew her.
wow.
Yeah, right. And the thing about that for me was, this was a teacher who was saying, go wild with colors. She was giving us some pointers that, the eyes are actually lower in the face than you expect them to be, and stuff like that. And, here's how you draw a nose. She was giving us pointers, but she was also encouraging us to just go wild, be wild with colors. So, I chose blue and green for the skin tones, Now, I know that drawing is it's not going to get me a degree in fine art. Yeah. But I was proud of it, right? And I was proud of it because somebody set me free enough to run with it. I was so proud of it that I showed it to my wife and went, "What do you think of this?" And she went, "That's cool." She goes, "But I can tell you're really proud of it." And I am.
Yeah.
It's the first thing I've ever drawn that I'm proud of. She went off and got it framed and hung it on the wall. I was like, I'm not that proud of it.
How did you feel though when you were doing the painting or doing the drawing?
I was nervous at the start.
Yeah.
And I was nervous at the start simply because I had that voice in my head going, you're not a creative person. You're certainly not an artist. But what got me was the teacher, the encouragement from the teacher. And once I realized I had the freedom to chase this whatever way I wanted to, and I wasn't going to be judged by her, it was awesome. Now, like I said, it was a team building exercise. The interesting thing was at the end of it, she said, "Now what you'll notice, everybody, is you've done a self-portrait." So Amanda's done a portrait of herself there, as you can see, and Katie's done a portrait of herself there, as you can see, and Rob, well, Rob's gone a little different, and Vanessa piped up and went, "Yeah, it's okay. We know he's an old lady on the inside," So even then there was a little bit of judgment, but it was kind of fun,
Because to me, creativity is so fragile, right?
Yes.
That you got to be able to overcome your inner fears or your inner voice to start with, and I think you got to be really comfortable to rumble with what's wrong. Because when I watch individuals who are fabulously creative, their approach is really different to business. Normally, it's the ready, aim, fire. No, it's the ready, fire, 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 fire. Then we'll aim. Put it up. So, I mean, my mum's an artist. I grew up in a very eclectic household. Mum would have a whole bunch of stuff she had started but hadn't finished, because it's a multitasking in that environment, where it'd be a painting or drawing or sketching, and then she'd start something else. And so she would move between these because the energy or the feeling wasn't quite right. Things would look wrong to her. To me, they looked bloody awesome, right? Yeah. And so there was something going on in her inner world of that's not hitting the mark for her. But it was unbelievable the amount of volume of work or the volume of art that was actually coming out. If I take a moment to think about Stephen King, amazing author, he talks about being super disciplined and writing 6 pages per day, which means that normally he's producing a book every 2.5 months, I think it is, he works towards. Who's the Game of Thrones author that you've got?
George R.R. Martin.
Yes, like he met with Stephen King. He's like, how the hell do you do that? Because he'll sit there and just go, I've got nothing. Why? I'm not a writer. I can't do this. Why am I even trying? And yet he's already published amazing books, right? So even the best of us are going to have doubts at times. So I think that inner voice of the fragility is so dangerous, but it wasn't always that way. If I think about kids, like, Did your niece have a problem drawing a lion or a cat or a donkey?
No. Yeah. I think there's a quote from Picasso that says, "Every child is born an artist. The trick is to remain an artist as we grow." I think the education system has a lot to answer for here, in that they often teach this is the right way to do something. And anything else is considered a failure, when in fact there's a whole heap of different journeys to your destination. The example you just gave, Stephen King and George Martin, very different approaches to writing, but they've both written fabulous books, right? Or even, when you were talking about your mum's art, to me, that's the perfect example of the ready, fire, fire, fire aim. I've done all of these firings, and some of them are going in the right direction. So I want to take elements of all of those and incorporate them into my next one, or something like that. I've seen my sister do similar things, where the stuff she left on her studio floor that I would have happily hung on my wall, but she was like, no, it's not quite right. I need to go here with something.
The interesting part about creativity is there's a huge amount of waste. They may not call it waste. They can talk about learnings or, beautiful mistakes that they've created that were really important, necessary steps for them to get to the final outcome that they had, which they weren't quite sure of what that actually looked like at the time. But if we sort of transpose ourselves now into the business world, if I said we're going to create a whole bunch of crap, a whole bunch of waste, and we're not actually sure what the end looks like, by the way. So I'm not sure how I'm going to paint the business case at this stage, or I can't even describe the output they've got. You just need to trust the process. And this whole concept of ready, fire, 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 and then aim is about as foreign as you can get in business. And I think you had an interesting take, though, because I use the word waste, and I use that pretty strongly, that there's a whole lot of things that will never see the light of day, but you had to go through those to reach that outcome. Do you want to share some of your take on that, Rob?
I always, every time I hear about waste, I think about that Thomas Edison quote, failure? No, I know 1,000 ways it won't work, and I really like that approach, that in going through all of that, there's almost like a journey of discovery along the way, where you go, well, that might have legs. You've often got to trust your intuition on it and go, that's a long shot, but it just might work. Or I love that idea. I'm not really sure why, but I do. Yeah. But what people miss is that in order to get there, you have to have all of these little failures, for want of a better word, or waste, for want of a better word. Those are just your first attempts, and it's only in learning from those that you get to the really cool stuff at the end. If my sister had been judged mercilessly about her art when she was a 6-year-old, she probably never would have gone on to have a degree in fine arts. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't claim for a moment that everyone's like that. There are some people, and they're usually the most creative, who don't give a shit what anybody else thinks. They'll go, that sucks. I don't care what you think. I think it's awesome, and I'm going to move on with it. To have that level of resilience, as far as I'm concerned, is particularly to judgment, is a superpower, and that allows people to be truly creative. But I think that's important. That idea of waste in business, is. I really think waste is the wrong word. I think it's a journey. If you think back to the last time your first idea was the best idea, it doesn't matter what you're doing, right? There's a process of firstly coming up with that idea and then refining it based on what you've learned. So your first idea is never the right one.
So the reason I use the word waste so strongly, though, is we work in a business world. If you imagined, hey, we want to take a creative approach here, and they're like, great, can you show me what the process is? Please use chevrons or map it out exactly for me. How much time will it take? What resources are you going to need? And what am I going to get at the end of it?
Yeah.
Creativity is like, well, I'm going to hang out in a bunch of different places, going to listen, learn, observe, and a whole bunch of fields that don't actually relate at all to our work environment we're in today. I'm just going to be painfully curious, to steal your term there, Rob.
Sure. Yeah.
And then on top of that, the fire is, imagine colleagues walking past that room as you're just going, wow, that PowerPoint sucked, that prototype burned, that mock-up I've done up there is like, I'm going to come back to that. Maybe not. I'll leave that over there. It just looks like a huge mess, right? A really uncomfortable mess. And then IT walks by and it's like, okay, have you thought about cybersecurity? Have you thought about what it's going to mean for using our existing environment? Or finance works by and say, hold on, you've used up half your resources by now. So they are desperate at that time for you to fit in with existing structures, things they're familiar with, things they're comfortable with. Your boss walks in. When will this be done? Like, how are you going? Like, I want to see progress, right? Yeah. It's all those safety checks that everyone's hoping or looking for. In a creative process, you don't have that. You have doing, you have outputs. You don't know necessarily if you've hit the mark. That measurability that businesses love or crave, often it's a feeling. It's a feeling at the beginning. I feel this problem's wrong. I feel there's an opportunity here, or I feel passionate about solving for this.
Yeah.
That's what drives you through that doing bit. And so the moment you kind of crib or stifle that energy in that creative moment, the chances of you getting creative output idea are Buckley's.
Yeah.
And when I look at many offices that I go into, I'm like, this is grey walls, this is grey carpet, there's very small windows light in here. And I'm asked to be creative. Well, at least we've got colourful Post-it notes, right? And then you've got the instant coffee that's percolated there for days. You've got stale sandwiches. It's like there's not even decent food that's nearby. It's like, come on. And the fact that they often do this fake entertainment where it's like, you're going to do ideation in a really short period of time and it's going to be great. I've been part of it. I run those kind of sessions. But the reality is we all know you'll get 600 ideas. 2 of them will be interesting. And yet when you chat to any of the folks who are leaders in that space, they're like, well, that's a terrible ratio. You got 598 ideas that you've just buried that had no Yep, that was the waste to get to the gold. And I think that the reason I call that so strongly on waste is there's no clear outcome. There will be failures from it. That's why I'm pushing on that topic, Rob, because I think we need to steer into how do we use a language that the businesses are going to be comfortable around, where we need to talk about waste, and that's okay. That is part of the process.
You've said some very interesting things there. The very fast ideation session, where you come up with 600 ideas, 2 of which have legs, 598 are waste. And you said that's a bad ratio. It is, absolutely. It's a bad ratio if you compare the 2 ideas that have legs to the 598 that don't. But if you compare the 2 ideas that have legs to the 0 ideas that had legs 15 minutes ago, it's actually quite a good ratio. I think the focus on the waste is the problem. Sure, it's there, but it's important that we get to those 2 ideas. Like I say to a lot of folks that I do this with, it only has to work once. You only have to come up with one killer idea in order to make it work. And I've seen this happen at a number of organizations that I've worked with, been following them on LinkedIn and seen ideas that came up in our workshops that have now got legs and are now doing wonderful things. And you're like, this is gold. I love it. But I think the issue is the ratio. If you compare the 2 to the 598, of course, it's a horrifically inefficient process. But if you compare the 2 to the 0 you had 20 minutes ago, it's a different story, right?
So I think efficiency obsession is actually one of the worst killers of creativity that we
absolutely
have. What else have you seen that absolutely buries creativity?
Judgment is the big one, and I know I've spoken about that already, but I think it's different in business. Even like I was saying with my sisters and my mum, it was a bit of a laugh. It tends not to be a bit of a laugh in business, and the simplest little thing can kill your creativity. Somebody yawning as you talk about an idea, somebody rolling their eyes when they go, "Oh, here goes Rob on one of his creative rants again." Something as simple as that can cause you to take a back seat and may shut you down for at least the rest of your time at that business, if not forever, And I think when we talk about the fragility of creativity, that's really important, is that one little thing can shut you down for a lifetime, But it's also, go and be creative, but do it inside all of these constraints. And you're like, how can I be creative when I have all of these constraints about me? You've spoken about environmental ones, terrible natural light and stale sandwiches and bad coffee and so on. But what I notice is, I do a lot of training where there are people in the same building who are being trained to be board members, the corporate directors, that sort of stuff. And it's all about risk and governance, all of it, right? There's nothing in there about creativity and how that should be encouraged in an environment. There's nothing about the fact that when you set people free to do what they want to do, you get good results, right? And it might just not just be my blue and green old lady self-portrait, right? It might be Gmail, you know, it might be post-it notes from 3M, you know, which happened when people were given autonomy and told to just chase something and see what happens. But in business, there's all of these, either the judgment or the constraints that kill off creativity in a big way. Those are the two major ones for me. The judgment in business tends to be something as simple as a yawn or an eye roll when you're in a meeting discussing this. But the constraints can be more. You know, yeah, you can do it, but don't, whatever you do, expose us to a legal or media risk or whatever.
I want to dive in on the constraints topic because I think there's a couple of lenses to that. One is constraints are bad, right? It locks us down. It stifles creativity. The other one is to actually say constraints can actually amplify your creativity. And the third one I'd put in there would be where constraints are actually bullshit, right? It's that we've put in ones there that because it makes us feel safe, protects our power, status, ego, whatever it happens to be. So to me, having constraints can actually be a good thing because it kind of forces you to go, say, okay, it's not the sky's the limit. I have to work within these environments. If you have too much money in business, I see a lot of waste happen where everyone is actually trying to just do, there's no risk, there's no, what am I looking for the word here? There's no sense of having to really think through what the possibilities could be, right?
Sure.
Within these constraints. It doesn't really challenge, is this a good idea or is there a different way I could approach this? I'm trying to think of an example. If you got one, Rob, off the top of your head where you face constraints, classic. My driveway's getting taken away, leveled at the moment, and they're laying concrete. And the idea was dig up the old, put in the new, happy days. They dug up the old only to find there was already a concrete base that was underneath it, right? And so it required them to be pretty creative on the spot as to how to actually solve for this. What are the pros and cons? How do we actually change the height? How do we change the mix to allow for this environment we're on? And the team worked their absolute magic. They chatted about it amongst the team, figured in terms of different mix was going to be required, a different thickness was going to be required, and away they went. But they didn't just go, oh, well, that was going to cost us a shitload more. They still had a budget they needed to work on. The way they solved it is, well, actually, somebody else has laid the foundation. We do not need to put all the sand, bed that all down, compact that, because that's already been done for us.
Sure.
So that flexibility of how do you kind of deal within those constraints, I think is a really important part of blossoming with creativity. The other problem, though, is I remember my mum teaching me when I was trying to draw, and I draw kind of like your lines there, Rob, not Paul McCartney, but I would try and draw on very small pieces of paper, right, like that you'd have. And as a result, my drawings became very tight, very mechanical. Mum's like, grab a big sheet, scribble on that. And that was to kind of free me up, to get me moving. So just as much can often be about the environment that you're in and the constraints you're choosing to place on yourself. So, for example, if you say the constraints, we must do the ideation in the corporate office, in the corporate room. Why? There's a bloody good cafe that has music and food and caffeine that's going to do down the road there. Let's give that a crack. Or can we go look at the local museum and hang out there? To me, I think you've got to really challenge the bullshit constraints that you're given. So, for example, when IT says, well, you can't do that, awesome. Can you list out why? What have I got to be mindful of as I approach these? And what would happen if we did break that or turn that off, right? So you've got to feel comfortable as you're doing creativity. You're going to need to navigate these bullshit versus real versus fake sort of constraints.
You were talking about the really short ideation sessions.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I actually quite like a really short ideation session from time to time is that it turns off your ability to sit back and self-judge your ideas. And, we can often be our own harshest critic. So, there's an interesting little constraint. Some of the constraints that we talk about in weird ways where we go, you know what, we tried that 20 years ago for 3 minutes and it didn't work then, so why would it work now?
To me, when I kind of look at some of the obstacles, though, that you face around creativity at work, right? I'm really keen for us to explore these and try and look at it from two angles. I'm going to play the role more of the business exec going, what are you doing? Creativity, risk, that kind of. Rob, I just want you to be you at that point.
Okay. That's sometimes the worst advice you can give me.
This is your honest, what the hell's going down? And it's like, I need to be creative in this environment and already facing some demons around that.
Yeah.
So when you kind of look at creativity and what's killing it in the environments you're going into, Rob, what are you seeing?
What's killing creativity in the environments I'm going into is this risk and governance approach. Yeah. Oh, we can't do that. It's too risky. Yeah. Creativity has to be risky, right? It has to be. If you think about any creative pursuit, like I was reading an article today about this morning about a person who went to a comedian show and got offended because they made a joke about something. And I'm like, what the hell were you thinking? You know, comedy isn't comedy unless it offends somebody. You know, I remember working for a city council where they got a complaint from a person about an art exhibit that was going on in the art gallery there.
Yep.
And again, I was like, well, what the hell did you expect? It's not art unless it offends someone, right?
Yeah.
So we get too caught up in this risk approach.
Yeah.
In business as well, you know, well, what if this gets out to the media? Well, okay, what if nothing gets out to the media because we haven't done anything because we're so scared of everything getting out to the media? You know, this.
Well, speaking of doing stuff, though, for me, efficiency. The obsession with efficiency is especially as the economy goes belly up. It's like, we need to double down on this. So the notion of being creativity, when you can't articulate the outcome, you've got a whole bunch of activities that looks like waste in it, and you're stuck with, can you tell me when you're going to finish by? Can you tell me if you're making progress? Those mechanisms for tracking progress don't work. The communication starts to fall apart. So if I came to you and said, Rob, I've got a problem. I have no idea what the idea is to solve this problem. I certainly face some heavy constraints around time. You're good to rock with me. And by the way, I need 20K, I think, to solve it. Maybe more. Not really sure. Would you give me that 20K?
Yeah, I would. but I appreciate that I'm the exception rather than the rule. Yeah. You know, there's something as old as the Pareto principle here, right? That we do 80% of our work in 20% of our time, you know, something like that. Humans aren't efficient creatures, right? And the problem that I see is that we talk about business as if business isn't made up of a shitload of people, you know, and those people are messy and they're inefficient and they don't fall neatly into the constraints that you want them to fall into, right? They're chaotic and that's okay. But businesses go out of their way to try to minimize that chaos rather than just set it free and see what happens. You know, so I'd give you all the money in the world if I was the CEO and as much time as I could to get it to happen, presuming you were working in a way that I thought was likely to get me to a decent account. Now, I'm not the sort of person who's going to worry about the 598 ideas that are not going to work as long as I get the two that do.
Yep. But that's where the trust is, right? That's where the rub is. It's like, do I believe this individual will solve it when I don't have clarity on the outcome or the answer? I have clarity around the problem, and I definitely value that getting solved or the opportunity to tackle. I think that's that trust. What do you need to show or have as an individual or as a team in order for leaders to be able to back you? I think that's where it gets a little bit hard in business. Is you talked about your teacher or your family, you know, your sister, and she laughed at your picture of a line. It's just one person, one gatekeeper you were trying to get by, right? You'd already passed, though, the niece. She said, yes, this is fabulous. Your sister said, what are you doing, you plonker? Whereas in business, you have to go through so many gates to try and get alignment. And so to say we're going to work in a really different way, we're going to be trying to be creative in how we're going to solve this. There's going to be a lot of things that aren't going to work out. And no, I can't tell exactly the outcome, but trust me, we're golden.
Yeah.
Like the chances are that you may even get it by your boss, your department's boss. You may even get it across a couple of silos. But to get a whole exec team saying they're prepared to kind of put cash into that, it's normally those last 5 yards where you fall short. And that is soul destroying, right? When you're trying to be creative, it's already fragile. You've had to overcome your inner voices.
Yeah.
You've won that many execs over to then fall in that last
At
bit.
that last hurdle. Yeah.
I'm out of here. I'm leaving the company. We are trying something different. This is not my people.
And that brings up an important point for me, Matt. That to me, there's a couple of things there. The first one is Paul, who just joined our corporate therapy community. Hi, Paul.
Yeah.
He asked, when did work stop being a joy just in itself? And my response to that straight away was, when I'm trusted, work is a joy.
Yeah.
When I'm not trusted, it sucks all of the joy out of it. Yeah. And I get that you've got to earn that trust, and you're taking baby steps at the start of your career. But eventually you get to a point where your boss should be able to go, he's got the runs on the board. He's got the experience I need. He's got the mindset I want. I'm just going to set him free and see what happens. Yeah. If there's somebody pulling on my reins at that point, I'm like, okay, you need to make a choice here. And I've done this. It's made me redundant at least once, where I've gone to the CEO and gone, you either need to let me off the chain to do this, or you need to decide that you don't want me here, because at the moment I've got this built and ready to go. I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs, waiting for your go.
That's frustrating. That lip service. Hey, this is an environment. It's safe to make mistakes. Knock it out of the park, and then they're going, okay, please fill in this business case. You need to then put it past this committee for the funding budget. Then I needed to have a weekly project status update that needs to be in this format. Meantime, you've got this fragile idea problem that you're just trying to keep your energy, your flow that's going working well, so that you can focus that energy on the problem and exploring alternative ways that normally everyone's saying, no, you shouldn't do that. That's not the ways we do around here.
Yeah. That it's not the way we do it around here was the problem that I came across in that particular example. I had been asked to come in and come up with a fairly extensive culture change plan, and I did that. And I had all of the execs saying to my face, "Oh yeah, this is a great idea. Run with it." And I had a couple of execs behind the scenes going, "Nah, that's going to erode my personal power." So it was one of these bullshit constraints that we were talking about earlier, and they were just pulling the rug out from under me, which made the CEO nervous. So when I said to the CEO, "Let me off the chain to get this done," he was like, "Just hold on a second."
But when it comes to organizations also faking creativity, that's the bit that frustrates the living bejesus out of me. It's like, we've just spent a quadrillion on building a lab. It's shiny. It's got beanbags. We've got lots of Post-it notes. They'll run a competition to be able to name what that lab should actually be called. They'll release a press release saying, hey, we're an innovative organization because we've done this. And then the staff just roll their eyes, because it's like, hold on, you spent all this money in this physical environment, but we have no budget or no opportunity then to go bring those ideas outside of that lab to life. And
outside of that lab is important, right? Because you get people who go into that lab, they, get exposed to a big design thinking project or something along those lines. And you reconnect with them a couple of months later and you go, how are you going? How has the program helped you to do it? And they go, oh, we just went back and our boss went, we have no time for design thinking, or we've no time to be innovative or creative or whatever it is. And to me, that's the issue. If innovation only exists inside the lab, if creativity only exists inside the lab, it's almost like there's a physical constraint there. When you go outside, it's back to business as usual. And that's people paying lip service to creativity. The thing that concerns me is when you have an organization like that.
Yeah.
That you can be as creative as you like inside the lab, but once you come outside the lab, you've got to make sure that it's in the right sort of Gantt chart and it's got a beautiful Excel spreadsheet attached to it, and the business case has to have rock solid numbers in it, like that's ever happened. I've written a few business cases and I plucked numbers out of the sky, and I'm sure most other people did too. But the point is, if you've got an organization like that, What I want to know, the question I want to grab the CEO and shake them and go, what are you afraid of? You know, and if it's media risk or legal risk or you know, a governance from a board perspective or something like that, what I want to go is, there are other ways to manage that without stifling the creativity, you know?
Yeah. But is there ever a time where you shouldn't be creative, Rob?
Well, yeah, we had a chat about this yesterday, Matt. You're going to throw me under the bus here, and fair enough too.
I've got the popcorn. We're good to go.
We had a, I won't use the word argument. We had a discussion yesterday where I was of the opinion that there are times that you shouldn't be creative. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's almost like the innovation triage thing. It's like when you know what the problem is and you know what the solution is, just get it done. You don't need to get involved in innovation to work that out, you know? My wife loves chickens. I love eggs, so it's a match made in heaven, you know. And I've grown to love chickens as time goes on. It's interesting that the fact that they're the closest living relatives of T-Rex, and they've never forgotten this. They're like proper little dinosaurs. But
you're stalling here, Rob. I'd like to say, yes, you want to rip the band-aid off this game's right.
When we moved to Mudgee, we ended up with a bit of land, and my wife decided she wanted to build a chicken coop. And I said, "Have you got a plan?" And she went, "Yeah." And I said, "Can you show it to me?" And she went, "No, it's in my head." And I was like, "Oh, then it's not a plan; it's an idea," you know. And we ended up making 5 or 6 trips to Bunnings. It was very much ready, fire, aim, although I'm not sure we haven't really got as far as the aim bit. Yep. And because we think in different ways, because she was being creative about it, she was just building it and seeing what happened. Yep. And because I'm much less creative, I have a much more logical approach to things like this. Yeah. I was just like, you know what? If you had given me a plan, we could have just done 1 trip to Bunnings rather than the 5 that we did. You know, if you had worked out beforehand that the beams that you wanted to buy weren't going to fit in the back of my ute, I wouldn't have had to get pulled over by the cop on the way home because, you know, these things were hanging out over the top. There were things like that frustrated the hell out of me. And my take on it was, you know what a chicken coop needs to look like. It needs to have a run. It needs to have a place where they can roost. It needs to have nesting boxes. Draw the plan and execute it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But she was approaching it much, much more creatively. And I was of the opinion then that this is just like buying a piece of IKEA furniture. You know, this was the analogy that you gave me yesterday. If you buy a piece of IKEA furniture and you try to be creative with it, it's probably going to fall over when you're done. Yeah. But then you spoke about the idea of kit bashing. You know, if you bought 3 pieces of IKEA furniture and decided you wanted to be creative with that, you might actually come up with something interesting, right?
But if I check my notes, Rob, that's in there. Sorry for bringing these up. You said, if I quote you, there is only one way to build a chicken coop.
Yes, and I was wrong. Yeah. I'm prepared to stand hand on heart and say that now. Now, I have to say, the chicken coop that we have that came from my darling wife's head is incredible. It's the most over-engineered structure on planet Earth. It will survive nuclear war. Like, if I hear the nukes are coming, I'm going to the chicken coop. It will probably be there long after we're gone. You know, it's incredible. Yeah. When I said there was only one way to build a chicken coop, what I really meant to say, and if I had thought about it more, what I would have meant to say was, there are a number of elements to a chicken coop that need to be there. You know, if you build a chicken coop without nesting boxes, there's going to be a problem. If you don't give them enough space in the run, there's going to be a problem, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if you've got roosting bars and you've got too many chickens to sit on those roosting bars, you're going to have a problem. Amanda just didn't see it that way. She was just like, I'm going to build a kick-ass chicken coop, and I'm going to work most of it out on the fly. Now, she did have an idea in her head. She's an incredibly creative person in the fact that she has a wonderful way of bringing these kinds of things to life, and there's nothing she won't try.
Yeah.
She also built a brand new deck for us, despite not having done woodwork since she was in high school.
Yeah.
And she's built it to a level that I've had carpenters come around here and go, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." She's incredible in that regard. And there were times that I could understand her creativity, like when she wanted to build a garden around the dam, and had all of these ideas about this is where the plant should go because that one will grow tall and these ones will have a wonderful contrasting color and blah blah blah. I saw that as a creative exercise.
Yeah.
But build a chicken coop, I saw as here's the problem, here's the solution. Make a plan to get from one to the other.
Yeah.
You know what you need to do. You need to build a run. You need to build a place for them to roost. You need to build nesting boxes. Work those out, and you're done.
I want to probe into that a bit more. Because I'm thinking about in organizations, how often do you have it where the team is, or the individuals in the team saying, I want to use this as a moment to express their creativity, whereas the boss is like, oh no, this is not the time for that, right? They've already got in the mind A to B should take this time.
Yeah.
Like I think about an individual who I won't name, but is a fabulous individual. Loves to play and tinker with technology. You know him well, there, Rob. And he will start things, but he won't always finish them. Right? He will be playing on stuff so that he learns. He will be learning amazing things, and then he'll use that information potentially 5 months later in some completely unrelated project. But all the boss was seeing at this point in time is starting stuff, never finishing stuff.
Right. Didn't see the learning journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to me, creativity, the energy you kind of need to unleash it, the joy that actually comes into that, that's what means you're staying there 8 o'clock at night just saying, okay, how do I make this prototype kind of work? That's what pushes you through well beyond. And so here we have a productivity crisis.
Yeah.
I think we've got a joy crisis.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I think we've got a joy crisis. I think you're right. And I think if we focused on the joy, the productivity would take care of itself, right? Oh, there's something in that, mate.
So to me, if you kind of looked across the ways you kind of working day, where is it joyless? And it will be different for different people, and that's okay. Like some people love the spreadsheets. Like this is my safe zone. Sure. I really enjoy it. And they can be creative as hell on how they're building the macros, the pivot tables, and knocking themselves out in that space. Versus the others, how do they write copy? So I think finding moments where is your joy, when you start working in joyless environments, your ability or even your willingness to be creative gets sucked completely out of you.
I think you're onto something there. I think when there's joy involved, creativity almost happens naturally. I mentioned to you yesterday that the one hobby that I've kept my entire life was fishing. I was fishing before I could walk. I have great memories of fishing with my dad, with my granddad, with my sisters, with a couple of mates of mine. Some of my finest memories. God, I've got a photograph of my dad holding up the biggest trout he ever caught in your homeland of New Zealand. Yeah. And you could not knock the smile off his face with a stick, So I've stuck with that hobby my whole life. And the cast in fly fishing, for those of you that aren't aware of it, is part of the joy of it. It's kind of like a golf swing. I think more people are familiar with golf than they are with fly fishing. But you throw the line back and the weight is in the line and it goes out behind you in a big loop, and then you fire it forward and it goes in front of you in a big loop. And if you do it right, the fly lands perfectly on the water and the trout grabs it and away you go. So it's a simple thing. You backcast, let the line go out behind you, flick forward, let the line go out across the water and lay it down. But there are times that the constraint hits where you go, I've got a load of trees behind me, so I can't do my backcast. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to find some way of applying momentum to that. What if I just did a roll cast where I dropped the rod really quickly and made a big loop just go out onto the water? One of the biggest fish I ever caught, I saw him cruising in a spot where I had trees behind me and constraints left and right. And he was right there. He was like 2 feet in front of my face. So I grabbed the fly and I pushed the rod out in front of me so that it bent way back. And then I went ping, and the fly just landed on the water. The trout grabbed it and I was in. Now, I thought I was being hugely creative at that point. Turns out that that's a well-known cast. It's called a bow and arrow cast.
Yeah.
But these are the sorts of things that you learn when you're at a very advanced level of fly fishing. And I've only been doing it for 50 years, so I'm nowhere near advanced yet. But the point is simply, I wouldn't have tried to be creative there if I didn't understand the joy that I get from catching a fish. The joy that I get from fly fishing. I wouldn't have bothered trying to work it out, So I think you're really onto something there. I think if there's joy, joy drives creativity. If there's creativity, creativity drives productivity. So we don't actually have a productivity crisis. We've got a joy crisis. That's gold, mate.
To me, the fastest way to kill joy is an unsafe work environment.
Yes.
It is a place where either there's micromanagement, and you appreciate I'm a recovering micromanager. The challenge their staff don't want to take risks. They don't want to be creative because they don't see the value or the point in doing it. I'm just going to be told what to do. I will wait. And so often when I hear leaders saying, I want my team to be creative and take risks and come, then reflect on what are your own leadership behaviors that you're exhibiting. How do you respond when individuals do color outside the lines?
Yeah. If you genuinely want to be your team to be creative, if you genuinely want them to chase that, then stop taking shots at them every time they stick their head up over the parapet. That's honestly how I see creativity in businesses like that, in unsafe environments. It's like the guy who sticks his head up in the medieval movie and gets the arrow in the head. Anytime you're outside of the lines, bad things are going to happen. And if your behaviors are not matching what you're saying, people will get even more distrustful and even more joyless in their work.
So for me, for joy to flourish, one is you've got to have a safe environment, but you've also got to have a huge amount of curiosity to kind of fuel I want to unpack what's going on here, to be able to observe the environment and really, really get to the problem. Because often the creativity we think is in the idea. I actually think creativity starts well before in the ready phase of like, how am I just getting understanding, some empathy, some compassion for my colleagues, for my customers, for what's going on in their world? Because otherwise, your chances of actually landing a successful idea, creative idea, yes, it may be creative, but it has zero value because it doesn't actually solve for a need of either the business, need of the customer. And that's where I think I've seen individuals who are fantastically creative, but they're tinkerers, right? In the sense that they're working on they're working on problems that have no chance of actually creating any value for the organization. And the reason I say that is the organization doesn't prioritize that problem being solved. Yes, they may creatively solve it, but if they did, would the company grow? Would the company's reputation, is there an outcome? So I just want to be cautious. We're not saying let's go feral on all creativity, right?
No.
There's got to be problems, a clear understanding or opportunities that the business is, yeah, I would absolutely love for that to be valued. That's your best way to avoid it being seen as waste, is to make sure if I solve this for the organization, would that be a good thing?
I know the impact that it would have. Yeah, absolutely. I think that prioritization and the understanding of the problem is a really big deal. I think that's one of the key mistakes people make with creativity is they get excited about the solution, about the idea, and they don't spend enough time just marinating in the problem.
We're working with a client at the moment, and the teams have all jumped to the solution is the system is crap, therefore we just need to build more Excel spreadsheets. And it's like a war of who's going to have the best spreadsheet. Right? It's like a bake-off of spreadsheets. And they spend a huge amount of effort, and they are beautiful spreadsheets. I'm not going to knock that. And they've done a great work to sort of integrate it in. But the funny thing is, nobody is using the other person's spreadsheet. Everyone's using to their own spreadsheet. Yeah. So we're not actually getting to the heart of the real issue. It's like, okay, why are people not prepared to share information? What's going on there? How do we solve for that? As opposed to a spreadsheet is the answer. So I do think having the empathy, having the understanding, but also the courage to really look in weird places. The word weird is such an interesting one, right? Because you say to your boss, I need budget to take the team to the art gallery. I need budget for us to go to a meatworks, or I need budget to go to a florist, and they're nothing to do with your industry.
Yeah.
Your chance of getting that budget's pretty limited.
Sure.
So I do think the brain, to be creative, needs to connect, not just the left and the right. It's individual connections being more, the neurons firing. The more diverse that is, the more creative your outcome you're going to be. So, Rob, when we started, you said, hey, I'm not very creative. I'm more rational. I'm more analytical, all that's going in that space. You actually need both, the creativity, the analytics, they kind of fuel.
You spoke about curiosity, and to me that's important. I know this is turning into the show and tell podcast, but I want to show you something else.
Today in lunch. Yeah.
So this is my Technic Lego car chassis. Yeah, and this I got when I was 10 or 11 years old from Santa Claus, and during the COVID lockdowns, I decided I wanted a little hit of nostalgia.
Yep.
And I went out and I found a guy who was selling one secondhand, and I built it again and immediately reconnected with my 10 or 11-year-old.
Yeah.
What I loved about that particular model was that everything was on display. You could see how the gearbox worked. You could see how the suspension worked. You could see how rack and pinion steering worked, and so on.
Yep.
And 40 years later, I used the curiosity that I got from that model, the confidence I got from that model, to service my tractor. Now, when you go to look at a tractor, particularly an old tractor like the one I have, it's the same age as me. It's a 1975 model. Yeah.
Yep.
Everything's on display. you can see everything. There's the oil filter. There's the fuel filter. There's where the airbox is. That sort of stuff. It almost encourages you to be curious. Yeah. It encourages you to identify the bits that are there because they're all on display. Yeah. You open the hood of my Ute and you see a big plastic cover that basically says, don't be curious about this. You can't handle this, right? You have no reason being confident about this unless you've got a computer that you can plug into it and you're a qualified mechanic. Yeah. I did a full service on my tractor in 45 minutes, 50 minutes, maybe.
Wow.
Whereas I pay a guy $800 to do a full service on my Ford Ranger that takes a day. So to me, I think that curiosity breeds confidence. Yeah, and in that curiosity breeding confidence, it allows you to be more productive. Maybe not. I'm not saying I'm being creative. I don't think you want to be creative when you're doing a service on a tractor. It's a Kubota tractor, but I'll just try a John Deere air filter and see if that works. Probably won't. You don't necessarily want to be creative about that. There's a right way to do those things, but I think that curiosity and the confidence that comes from it allows you to be more productive, to tackle a problem that perhaps you wouldn't normally tackle. Yeah,
but to me that it's interesting. I don't know if we want to be creative on your tractor. It's like. To me, creativity is you're just stealing from somewhere else, some experience you've had, some exposure you've had, and you're just applying it here. You just said, I took it from Lego, and now I'm applying the same confidence here. I just think too often we make creativity to be this magical talent that only a few of us possess, which often has an artistic bent to it, whereas it's like it's your ability to solve problems, harness opportunities in a way that is absolutely pilfered. And given your Irish heritage, Rob, I would have thought, and your ability for your fellows to find very creative ways to start cars, I would have thought creativity would have been absolutely in your roadhouse.
I should know more about tractors than I do, given that I grew up in Ireland. The first thing I ever drove was my uncle's Massey Ferguson 135. It's interesting. I like the way you put that creativity is just you stealing from somewhere else and applying that. I had a chat with our old mate Nathan, and I was saying to him, there hasn't been an original idea ever, because he was talking about innovation and coming up with original ideas, and fidget spinners were all the rage at the time. Remember those things with the three things and you spin them around? and I found a picture of a toy that was buried in the ash in Pompeii. And
Wow.
you could basically hold it in the middle. It was a piece of bone or something that somebody had carved three little wolves' heads into, and
Yeah.
it spun. And I was like, there's a fidget spinner from, whatever it was, 87 AD or something like that. There are no original ideas. So I get where you're coming from. We're stealing ideas from one place, and we're applying them to a new challenge, to a new
New
problem.
challenge, a new context. And I think
Yeah.
that's the why having either diverse experience yourself or diverse team members. Like, think
Yes.
how often you try and create silos where I want to be amongst my people because we all use the same language and we all kind of work in a similar way. I don't want to hang out with the legal team. They're just going to say no, or the finance team or the IT. In fact, they're the best folks to kind of bring into the room. I saw Atlassian this week just published a paper that said during the discovery and ideation phase, I think it was something like 80 to 90% of the time, the engineers were not in the room.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And it's like, I'm pretty sure engineers can have an amazing opportunity to be creative if you just engage them. I think the ability to stop putting blinkers or constraints around the people you need to reach out to is a very important part as a leader of you encouraging looping in others.
Yeah. Yeah.
What other advice would you have for folks who are trying to encourage creativity, especially in a conservative organization?
That's a really good question. And I think, we could probably do a whole other podcast just on the answers to that one. I think there's a lot in there. Probably the most important one for me is that you've got to be okay with people failing. You have to give them an environment where it's safe to do that.
Yep.
You've got to have that diversity that you've mentioned, which means embracing the weirdos, right? And that's important. You want people who think differently to you.
Yeah.
Like the way you shook me up yesterday by going, "There's not just one way to build a chicken coop." We think differently. That's one of the reasons I think that we get on as well as we do, and what you want to do is bring the weirdos into the group, bring the ones who have crazy out there thinking, and make sure they have a voice, right? I think that's really important. Obviously, as you mentioned, you want people from all walks of life, from all different parts of the organization as well.
But you also need to give them time. You touched on this, right?
Yeah.
So if you're always on trying to solve a BAU problems, issues, your ability just to pause, to reflect, is just going to be dampened. Your ability to play, your ability to create new connections is going to really be hampered. That takes time.
It does. And there are no organizations that I know of at the moment that are still giving people that time, and I don't get that. That to me is completely illogical, right? We saw what happened with Google's 20% time. We saw what happened with the same stuff at 3M, with the same stuff at Atlassian. I think Atlassian might still be doing it.
Yep.
They used to have a thing called FedEx days where you could work on whatever you wanted, but you had to deliver something in 24 hours, a horrible trademark violation, but a good thing. The point is simply that there are very, very few organizations giving people that time. So one of two things happens there. Right?
Yeah.
Either people get excited about a problem and they work on it on their own time. Yeah. So my wife's just got a new job. And I was asking her how it was going last night via message. She was in Sydney. I was still in Mudgee. And she said, "You know what? I'm really loving the problem solving." Yeah. And I was like, "Cool." She goes, "Which is probably why I'm still at the office at 9:30 p.m. It's like, oh God, no. So this is it. You're either getting people burning themselves out on their own time, or you're getting people who are already so burnt out that they just want to go home and veg, and they don't have, they're playing video games or they're watching something on Netflix that they just don't have the mental fortitude anymore to go, I'd really love to chase that problem, but I can't because all this BAU is getting in the way. What we need to do is make innovation and creativity the way we do BAU. Now, that's a big ask, But Dan Pink was talking about this in 2011. And the results were there then. The catch cry in his TED talk was, there's a difference between what science knows and business does. Yeah. The data's in. Why the hell are we ignoring it?
I think it comes down, it's such a scary place to be. That's what creativity is. You've got a chance of being wrong. And I think with school, as soon as you've left school, it's all about being right.
Yeah.
Our whole society.
I think we need to rebrand creativity.
Okay.
I think we need to stop talking about creativity. We need to talk about the thing you mentioned earlier, that joy leads to productivity. Yeah. We need to start talking about stuff like the importance of autonomy, of trusting somebody to let them go and chase the big idea that they've got, or the big problem that they want to solve. The moment you mention creativity, you get a whole heap of old dudes in suits going woo and clutching their pearls. What we want to do is get them to a point where we talk about productivity rather than creativity. That we talk about the joy that leads to productivity rather than creativity. That we talk about giving people autonomy, trusting them, understanding that they've got experience and mastery in their little domain, and letting them off the chain to make it work. If I can be cynical for a moment, I think the chances of that happening are pretty slim, at least until we get, some sort of wholesale change. But I don't see that coming anytime soon.
But I do, without depressing the audience here, Rob, I do think as a middle manager, you can look at your own team and how do you support them to take risks, to explore, most importantly, to share the learnings. Like, that's the way that people get connections. If you've got a team member who's fantastically technical, another one who's far more artistic, how do you get them to hang out together and to chat? That's where the richness comes.
If you're in the most toxic, most risk-averse organization on the planet, if you have the resilience to get your team, just your team, to embrace some of this stuff, they'll do better than everybody else in that toxic, non-creative environment. And when they do better, they'll get promoted. And maybe then they start doing it with their team and their team and their team. The problem I see with that is it's a long game. And a lot of people don't have the resilience to make it work. They just don't have the ability to shield themselves from the toxicity for long enough to make it happen. And they either go and find a better place for them, or they shrink to fit. I have seen a number of folks, though, who have had a wholesale impact on an entire organization just because they don't let that shit get them down. And that kind of resilience, I mean, that's a godlike power in business.
Now, that's a much more strong end to go with there, Rob. Liking that one. So in this episode, you learned real creativity doesn't need more beanbags or another hackathon. It needs space, safety, and leaders willing to trade predictability for possibility. Rob, anything you'd like to finish or add?
Curiosity leads to creativity. Creativity leads to productivity. And that productivity gives you the confidence to start the cycle all over again. So as I always say, stay curious.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Subscribe, share, and join us for more episodes where we get real about the messy stuff in business. Until next time, keep your ideas feral.